So again, what I want to do is recap. How do we end up figuring out the mechanism of injuries, and how do we avoid this impingement, and how do we rehab from this injury and get back to the point where we can train at a high level? All right. So here are the keys. Right. The first one is dynamic rotator cuff control. Now, this is one of the absolute biggest things I see missing, right? People do not do rotator cuff work. They hate it. They think it's stupid, right? We have so much research. It shows we have great specific exercises that are great at targeting the rotator cuff, have great EMG of those muscles. We can hypertrophy those. We can get those stronger. We can get to those to the point where they can handle the stress of what we're doing, okay? We also need the rotator cuff to time well. We need to make sure that when we press something overhead, the rotator cuff fires before the deltoid. We need dynamic control from the rotator cuff, all right? We don't just need strength and hypertrophy, we need good endurance. If I'm doing lots and lots of dips in a workout, if I'm doing lots and lots of repetitions, if I'm doing extremely heavy weight, I need to make sure that I can do that for a long period of time, right? If I do a huge set of butterfly pull-ups, I might start off with great strength and control, but how about towards the end of the set when I don't have good endurance of the scapular stabilizers? Well, at that point, you might be causing more wear and tear, more impingement, okay? Next one is adequate range of motion, all right? And this is where mobility is incredibly important, especially with overhead motion. Again, if I have poor overhead motion and I'm trying to snatch a weight, I can't get into a good position and I can't perform well because I don't have that range. The next part is that I'm probably putting my joints in a compromised position. And this happens during a bar path when I'm snatching, which we have some videos to show you a little bit later on, and also happens with external rotation in a back and front rack. I need to have that range of motion in order to do the movement properly. Again, extension is incredibly important. I feel it's overlooked in the physical therapy setting. We need to have large range of motions in order to get into a deep dip position. If you watch guys like Dave Durante do muscle ups, he catches his muscle ups a lot of times with 90 degrees of extension or more. That's a ton of motion in the shoulder joint, and most people aren't even able to get to the typical 50. So if we're talking about dips and someone doesn't have the range of motion to get there, chances are they're not going to have the stability within the shoulder joint either because they've never been to those extreme ranges, and we're throwing ourselves up into a dip without that range of motion control, and then we wonder why people end up getting hurt. Okay. And again, restricted mobility is going to lead through compensation, and this can happen through compensated scapular positions. It can also happen to increase stress on the capsule because we don't have the mobility to move through the soft tissues adequately. All right. And the other one that I'm going to talk about is adequate strength. Okay, this is a no-brainer. We don't do it. How many people do dips every single week to build strength and control for your muscle ups? Okay. The 2017 CrossFit Regionals, we saw lots and lots of dips, and we saw a lot of blown pecs, right? Now, are these people practicing things like tempo dips? Are they working on the bottom position of their dip? Are they doing ring dips on a regular basis? Are they doing weighted ring dips, okay? Are they doing speed weighted dips? Are they working on their endurance of dips over time in this progressive fashion? I would say not, and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people end up getting hurt. They don't have this strength. They don't have the great programming. They don't have the periodization that is so important, okay? Same thing happens with pull-ups. We need to have strength, especially eccentric control, all right? We need to have good control on the way down of a pull-up so that we don't bottom out, right? The other thing is we need to have stability and range, right? When we go down into a kipping pull-up, when we go down into the muscle-up, the most stressful time on our joint is going to be the time that we hit the bottom. We have to quickly reverse that motion, okay? We need to have great stability and range. Couple that with poor technique and the loss of a hollow and arch positioning, and we just crank on those shoulder joints, right? The bottom part of that pull-up becomes very stressful in the capsule and can cause impingement, right? So the other thing is that when Dave Tilley and I talk about the continuum model all the time, what we need to do is to work on skill and strength first. And honestly, I should have put mobility here, which we already have. Work on your mobility, get full range of motion of the shoulder joints so you can work on your skill in a non-compensated position, and then start working on your strength. Build that up over time, and then once you've built your strength up, then work on endurance. And this is a great model for rehabilitation. Let's say that I just came back from a shoulder injury. I want to get back to muscle ups. What do? Make sure I get out of pain, get adequate mobility, work on your skill and strengthen everything first. So things like P-bar dips, things like ring dips, things like pause work, things like tempo on the bottom of the dips, right? Same thing goes for the pull-up. Work on your skill, transition drills, work on strict muscle ups. Once you get that hammered down, now you start incorporate that into workouts. Now I start working on endurance. Now I start working on the ability to handle a lot of volume of stress in a fatigue state. But again, that's towards the end of the spectrum after I have the adequate strength, right? Other really important key concepts that people don't think about often are total pressing volume. Think about some of the research from Tim Gabbett. Tim Gabbett showed if you go above a certain volume, your risk of injury goes up 7,000%. To me, that's absolutely amazing, right? Just keep in mind that when you press overhead, every single time you press overhead, impingement is occurring. This is natural, this is normal, but if we do too much of this, we don't have good control, we don't have all of these things in place like programming periodization, that's going to be more compression, right? And that's going to give people problems over time. Okay. And the last little bit is that we need to individualize per person. And this I don't think we talk about enough. So let's say that I'm 31 years old, right? So I'm 31. Let's say Dave Tilley is 31, which he's not. He's a little younger than me. Let's say that we have the same exact backgrounds. Let's say that we're both elite level gymnasts, right? And I go into the gym and I can handle dips 4 days a week. I can dip every single day of the week. I can muscle up all the time. It never bothers my shoulder. Let's say for Dave, if he does it more than about 2 times per week, his shoulder starts to bother him. And he knows, like, okay, if I'm doing it twice per week, I'm probably going on a path that may cause problems for me. So I need to figure out what I need to do with my programming to make sure that I don't end up getting hurt. And for Dave, maybe he has poor mobility. Maybe he has to work on his mobility. Maybe he has poor rotator cuff strength. Maybe he skipped all those steps where he had to work on his foundation. So eccentric control, pausing at the bottom, more work on P-bars, stable surfaces, poor unstable surfaces. Maybe he didn't have that beforehand. But you have to think about this. Individuals are all different in how much stress they're able to handle, right? And this can be improved upon over time, but it's something to think about because you're going to get athletes that have shoulder pain all the time. And chances are they might not be able to handle as much volume as someone else. Okay, so total pressing volume is important, but it's very important for the individual. Next one, obviously adequate technique. And again, we went over this. Good positions for overhead press, for pull-ups, for push-ups, dips, bench press. Having good bar path during cleans and snatches, then having a great lockout position during jerks and snatches. These things are going to influence overall stress on the shoulder, but they also influence position. Good positions are going to lead to more weight, right, and higher performance over time. It makes sense, all right? And the third one here, and maybe the most important of all of these, is ego, right? And we don't talk about this a lot, but in our lecture on programming and periodization, we talk a lot about training versus competing. Now, when you walk into the gym, it's a lot of fun to compete. Competing is one of those things that's going to drive you to the next level. It's just that if you're competing on a regular basis, you're trying to get a better number on the board, you're trying to get more weight, a lot of times your technique starts to fall away. We start to ignore some of the pain that's popping up in our bodies. And over time, we get hurt, right? So again, when you go into the gym, your goal is to get better. Your goal is to stay healthy. We need to make sure that we're balancing our training and our competition. We're checking our ego at the door. We're actually getting the right training stimulus for the day. We're not using poor technique. We're not going out of the energy system range we're supposed to for that day just to get your name on the board. We're checking that ego. We're doing what we should do on a regular basis. And for someone who's a competitive athlete, a lot of times it's hard to do. But when people come in and they get hurt, a lot of times this is the reason why. Their ego is too big and they are not able to train adequately and they end up getting hurt because of that.